Development and Investment of Belize, I invite him to address the General Assembly.
Mr. President, congratulations on being elected President of the General Assembly. It is with great pleasure to see a representative of our fellow small island developing state presiding over the 76th section of the United Nations General Assembly. For a small island state and low-lying coastal state like Belize, which 3 days ago celebrated 40 years of political independence, the world today is hostile and precarious. No one can deny that the planet is getting hotter. The facts are that July 2021 was the hottest month ever. Each of the last 4 decades have been successively warmer than any decade that preceded it since 1850. Global temperature is now 1.2 degrees warmer. Sea levels are rising. The fact is that global average sea level has risen faster since 1900 than over any preceding century in the last 3,000 years. Since 1900, droughts are unprecedented and have become more frequent and last longer. Severe weather events are more frequent and devastating. The last 20 years have seen the number of major floods more than double, while the incidence of storms grew from 1,457 to 2,034. Mother Nature is rebelling. She is reacting to our destructive tendencies and our refusal to take urgent corrective action. We can do better. And now, Mr. President, our capacity to survive is being tested by the unrelenting COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 brought the Belizean economy to its knees. Unemployment reached 30% as thousands of Belizeans lost their jobs. GDP declined by 14%. Our debt ballooned to 130% of GDP. Many small businesses were shuttered. The poverty rate increased to 60%. The impact of the pandemic has been swift, dramatic, and devastating. The human toll has been deadly. Already 399 Belizeans lost their lives to COVID-19. We have a fatality rate of 2.05%. Thousands have been hospitalized so far. Our health facilities are overwhelmed as they were unprepared for the surge in admission of critical patients. This is not unique to Belize. To confront the urgency of the pandemic, governments across the globe reallocated funds to meet desperate needs. Loans originally committed for development and climate change were diverted to cover emergency health needs and to mitigate the impact of the unemployed. Massive additional borrowings became the new normal as lockdowns were extended. The Common Framework and Debt Service Suspension Initiative failed to offer forbearance to most middle-income SIDS, including Belize, who are ineligible despite our debt unsustainability. At the same time, most of our countries had no recourse to concessionary financing to fund the immediate health response.
Mr. President, Belize's commitment to conservation is ambitious. We recognize that our debt is unsustainable, and we are going to tie it directly to conservation. We are going to exchange millions of dollars in debt for significant commitments to sea conservation. We hope that 30% of our exclusive economic zone will be designated a protected area before 2026, and that is far before the year 2030. Moreover, we will establish a maritime conservation fund to be held in perpetuity. We will proudly stand at the forefront of work in this area, owing to our love for nature and our respect for the environment.
With the advent of the vaccine, government self-financed its acquisition from COVAX and concurrently reached out to bilateral partners to solicit vaccine donations. It was vaccines from our South-South partners which allowed government to roll out our national vaccination program. Mr. President, the immediate global response was slow and inadequate to the scale and depth of the health crisis. Disruption of supply chains made access to the much-needed COVID-19 therapeutics, diagnosis, and PPEs beyond the reach of many developing countries. Vaccine hoarding has reduced access to COVID-19 vaccines for developing countries, undermining COVAX and leading to deep and threatening inequalities. 80% of vaccines administered worldwide have been in high and upper middle income countries. Only 0.4% of doses have been administered in low income countries. In Latin America and the Caribbean, the region worst hit by the pandemic, only about a fifth of the population has received vaccines.
Despite the immoral inequities, countries that have higher vaccination rates are about to administer booster shots to their people, those people that are already vaccinated. That's not only unfair, it's quite simply ludicrous. There is no doubt that the world urgently needs to once again commit to multilateralism.
Exists today because of the multilateral system. The support of UN member states for Belize's territorial integrity and respect for our right to self-determination was critical to the achievement of Belize's independence. For us, the multilateral system is indispensable. For this reason, Belize supports the Secretary General's thoughtful and forward-looking Our Common Agenda, which sets out a concise plan of action to accelerate the implementation of our agreed goals, including Agenda 2030. Despite the inclination to retreat towards nationalist tendencies, the truth is that whether it is the health or climate crisis, the scale of the challenge, the magnitude of the impact, and the urgency of the action required cannot be met by any one country alone. Inequality and vulnerabilities are also a threat to the rich and strong. Therefore, our common future depends squarely on our solidarity, international cooperation, and a strong and effective multilateral system. We must commit to finding solutions together to the common problems that we confront. Unbridled unilateralism must yield to the settled determination to respond to the major problems of our times with social justice. My country is pursuing, along with Guatemala, the final and peaceful resolution of Guatemala's claim to Belizean territory at the International Court of Justice. In the meantime, the 2005 Agreement on Confidence-Building Measures remain in effect, and our bilateral relations continue to be based on mutual goodwill. We count on Guatemala to remain a constructive partner and rely on the international community to support us in addressing the daily challenges along the border that are inevitable between neighbors. If the multilateral system is to be our collective lifeline, it must be repurposed. I wish to propose 4 areas for the reform and strengthening of the multilateral system. We call for a genuine commitment to address the systemic issues which undermine the achievement of our agreed development goals. The continued ineligibility of SIDS from accessing concessional finance leaves us in a vicious cycle of disaster or crisis recovery, borrowing leading to unsustainable levels of debt. This must be disrupted. A multidimensional vulnerability index is the indispensable tool for restoring rationality to access affordable financing. We therefore welcome the work of the UN and other development partners, such as the Commonwealth and the Caribbean Development Bank, in developing an MVI that does not only consider economic development, but also the inherent vulnerabilities of SIDS, scale, geography, and limited natural resources. We need to adopt an MVI now. We call upon all the international financial institutions and our development partners to use it. There is no alternative if our countries are to embark on a sustainable and resilient economic development plan. If our multilateral system is to remain credible, it must have the capacity to induce action. For far too long, too many global problems have been allowed to fester and become crises. The entire world is now experiencing the consequences of our inaction: catastrophic droughts, fires, floods, and more frequent and intense hurricanes that continue to affect and set back our small, open, and dependent economies. The latest scientific assessment of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change lays the blame firmly on human activity. Belize, like other SIDS, is on the front line of a climate crisis for which we are not responsible. Belize incurs annual losses of close to 4% of GDP due to natural disasters. Therefore, we felt an obligation to put forward an ambitious, revised, nationally determined contribution. Belize's NDC covers new targets in both adaptation and mitigation. It is naturally aligned to both our national development plans and the SDGs. We have set some ambitious targets, including forest restoration and expansion of mangroves, as well as achieving 75% of electricity from renewable sources by 2030. The NDC also pledges to transition to a hybrid and electric public transportation system, increase resilience of coastal communities, and strengthen the adaptive capacity of agriculture, health, and tourism. Belize is committed to developing a long-term strategy aligned with achieving net zero global emissions by 2050. We are doing our part. We expect the developed countries and major emitters to do their part. Indeed, ambitious commitments from the G20 alone can keep us on the path to limiting global temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius. COP26 is our latest best hope to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level. We call for a revamping of our collective ambition so that by 2030, global emissions are reduced by 50%. Developed countries and those in a position to do so must provide the financial, technical, and capacity-building support to enable us to fulfill those pledges. This includes meeting and exceeding the $100 billion pledge made in Copenhagen 12 years ago. Additional support must be provided for the loss and damage being incurred through the extreme and slow onset climatic events we are already experiencing. Flexibility and responsiveness are critical if our multilateral system is to have relevance at moments of crisis, as well as to ensure equity and fairness in global responses. COVAX, the multilateral mechanism for vaccine distribution, has been unable to truly respond to the needs of its subscribers. The undermining of COVAX through export bans, vaccine hoarding, and predatory purchasing has resulted in extreme inequality of access to vaccines. Of the more than 5.7 billion vaccine doses that have been administered globally, 73% have been given in just 10 countries. COVAX has had to cut its forecast for distribution of vaccines by 25% for 2021. Belize has no delivery date for its next COVAX shipment. As the Director General of the WHO said, the longer vaccine inequality persists, the more the virus will keep circulating and changing. The longer the social and economic disruption will continue, and hinder the chances that more variants will emerge that render vaccines less effective. The health and recovery of all of us depend on the ability of our system to rapidly respond to the needs of all countries. The multilateral system must be more effective in protecting the rights of all people. Too many people remain marginalized and excluded, weakening the social contract, eroding trust in our multilateral system to deliver. Mr. President, the persistent call of the General Assembly over 3 decades to end the illegal embargo against the Cuban people has been ignored. The Cuban people are forced to carve out their sustainable development under the burden of the illegal, unilateral economic, commercial, and financial embargo. The new measures imposed by the past U.S. administration are now continued and widened by the present one during a pandemic are unbelievably cruel and inhumane. These measures bring suffering to millions of innocent people and do not reflect the goodwill of the people of the United States of America. Nevertheless, Cuba has made significant sacrifices to help other people in the world, including Belizeans. Our Palestinian brothers and sisters continue to suffer under an oppressive apartheid and illegal Israeli occupation. Belize fully supports the aspirations of the Palestinians for an independent state with its 1967 borders, with all attendant rights, including the recognition of East Jerusalem as its capital and the right of return. And the Sahrawi people are similarly being prevented from exercising their right to self-determination. We urge the relevant parties and the international community to support them in their efforts. Belize is also deeply concerned about the situation in Haiti and about the regional and global inaction to offer genuine and substantive program of support. We are alarmed at the inhumane treatment of Haitian refugees who are risking their lives traversing 2 continents for a better future. We therefore call on the UN to galvanize action of the member states and its development system to support the development of a Haitian-led resolution, restoring its sustainability and security. Our multilateral system must also be inclusive, harnessing the capacity of all states to scale up international cooperation where it is most needed. Belize has benefited greatly from our diplomatic partnership with Taiwan that is based on the shared values of democracy, freedom, human rights, and the rule of law. Taiwan has provided tremendous assistance to Belize in terms of medical supplies and financial support, so Belize is better equipped in combating COVID-19 and conducting post-pandemic recovery. Belize calls for Taiwan's inclusion in the United Nations and its specialized agencies, which will not only further enhance global cooperation and partnership, but also manifest the United Nations' enshrined principle of universality. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is crystal clear that the confluence of crises facing the world can only be addressed through solidarity, international cooperation, and multilateral approaches. Let us not return to this great hall in September 2022 to lament further inaction. Let us not return next year to again decry unilateralism, nationalism, and failed collective action. No, Mr. President, we must move forward together. We can defeat COVID-19, but we can only do so together. We must save the planet from the irreversible effects of climate change, but only if we act collectively and urgently. Together we can reform the world's financial architecture to guarantee debt relief, make available affordable financing, and adopt a multidimensional vulnerability index. Together we must lift billions out of poverty and provide affordable housing, education, and health care. Failure is not an option. We believe in the power of humanity, in the noble spirit of mankind. We have confidence that we can and we will make the world a better place. The people of Belize, the citizens of the world, expect nothing less. Thank you.
We've been watching live the statements of the Prime Minister of Belize, Jhon Briceño, as part of the high-level debate of the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly. The Prime Minister underlined the challenges facing his country as a developing state and called for international support for efforts to overcome the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. He also called for vaccines to be shared, noting that only about a fifth of the population has been vaccinated in Latin America and the Caribbean, and criticised the unfair move by richer nations to offer booster shots to their populations while other nations remain without doses. We will, of course, continue to provide you with all the coverage as the UN General Assembly continues its 76th session. For teleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.